The Valhalla Wilderness Society has been working for over 40 years to protect wildlife habitat in British Columbia. Starting with the campaign to protect Valhalla Provincial Park, which began in the mid-70s, the organization has led park campaigns that now protect over 500,000 hectares of BC wilderness. Over the last 20 years, one of the major projects of the organization has been focused on the interior Wetbelt of British Columbia, also known as the Inland Temperate Rainforest region. The goal of the Society has been to identify and map out the most ancient intact remnants of this ecosystem to propose for protection with Class A Provincial Park status. The interior Wetbelt covers most of southeastern BC, but it is only the very wet and wet interior cedar hemlock forest types that are considered true rainforest. These are the forests that are able to maintain enough moisture year-round to host coastal rainforest lichen species. One rainforest indicator in particular that you see here is of the genus Spherophorus. It's a coastal coral lichen species. So only the wettest forests and the most intact and pristine forests can host such abundant colonies of coastal species. Then we also see interesting plant growth, such as ferns growing high in the crevices of cedar trees, which is indicative of a very wet ecosystem. And you also get this very lush moss growth that's very characteristic of true rainforest. And some of these colonies can actually be quite ancient. Until 2017, there had only been 3 major intact biodiversity hotspots that had been discovered in British Columbia of this ancient inland temperate rainforest ecosystem. These are in the Robson Valley, the Uncompahgre Valley, and the rainforest around Quesnel Lake. Then in 2017, Dr. Toby Spribilli, a lichenologist with the University of Alberta, alerted the Valhalla Wilderness Society of an area just north of Revelstoke that he thought might still contain vast tracts of truly ancient inland temperate rainforest in 2 very low elevation contiguous valleys. So this is our study area here. Frisbee Creek, which is just adjacent to the very popular Frisbee Ridge recreation area, and then the valley just north of it that is actually unnamed, but we have called it Rainbow Valley because of a beautiful rainbow that appeared over it on the day of exploration. Logging is encroaching around this wilderness, and it's very special to find intact wilderness in 2 contiguous valleys that are also fully unroaded like this. And we are running out of this type of intact wilderness in British Columbia. I joined the Valhalla Wilderness Society in 2017, and I was very lucky to get to take part in the very first exploratory reconnaissance and species surveys and wildlife habitat assessment that followed in these 2 valleys. We are a nonprofit organization, and I would just like to say thank you so much to our donors and supporters for making all of this possible. When we entered into the largest of the 2 valleys for our initial reconnaissance in 2017, we were thrilled to, in fact, find this very ancient inland temperate rainforest ecosystem. We didn't have time at this point for full species surveys, but we knew that we had come across a very biodiverse and rich ecosystem, an incredibly wet ecosystem that could be considered true rainforest and some of the last of its kind. We came across vast tracts of this ancient cedar hemlock forest with trees well over 3 meters in diameter, and some of these trees can be in the range of 1,500 years, perhaps even older based on some of our aging that's been done in the Uncompahgre ancient forest, which has been studied more extensively by the Valhalla Society. We returned home and we were very excited to share what we had found with the team and to start planning the first ecological inventories of these 2 valleys to take place in 2018. There were no previous records of any scientific study having taken place here. What we found when we entered back into the largest of the 2 valleys was not only vast tracts of this ancient inland rainforest ecosystem, but also a mosaic of all sorts of other ecosystem types. So you can see a very prominent wetland ecosystem here near the mouth of the Frisbee Valley. And we not only found very ancient forest, but also young forest, mixed stands, deciduous forest, all sorts of avalanche slides, giant balch rock slides where conditions were such that very unique lichen colonies could grow, and multiple wetlands, including marshes, fens, and a previously undocumented wetland ecosystem type that was pretty exciting. And there are also waterfalls with very lush spray zones that are highly biodiverse, sandy beaches on the creek shore, and this very unique forest type called an elfin forest, where these very old hemlock trees are growing in conditions such that they're stunted in their height and somewhat in their diameter, and they have this very characteristic gnarly bark structure. So there was quite an extensive elfin forest in the smaller of the two valleys, and this was also the site of a provincially blue-listed species at risk, Loberia retigera, the smoker's lung lichen. And it was found growing in abundance, where in other areas, usually only small specimens have been found. The first actual ecological inventory that took place was a plant and lichen survey, and this was completed by Curtis Bjork and Toby Spribilli, who are two taxonomic experts in the inland rainforest region. So it was a pleasure to work with them. Over a 3-day period in the two valleys, we surveyed a variety of different habitat types with a focus on areas that were expected to contain the greatest biodiversity and also that might reveal rare species. A major focus in this ecosystem type are the lichens, and the reason that these organisms are so important is that they are indicators of ecosystem health, and there are also an array of lichen species that indicate the rarest, most biodiverse, and wettest forests that we have in the interior wetbelt. And they can also indicate high biodiversity in other classes of species. This is just a preliminary list of the numbers of different plant and lichen species found, and since then there have been more additions to this list. And this is not an exhaustive inventory as well, so we imagine that upon further study there are going to be more discoveries made as well. There have also been a number of provincially red and blue listed species found in the two valleys, but many of the species that have been discovered that are rare and uncommon are actually not yet recognized in British Columbia, so they're not listed. But it's largely been the work of Toby and Curtis who have described and identified and assessed some of these rare species and species that are rare to be found inland. Dr. Toby Spribilli has a list of about 25 different lichen species that indicate the truly ancient, wet, and biodiverse inland rainforest ecosystem, and so far in this study area we have found 20 of those 25 species. And again, some of them have been found in unusually large colonies as well. And only one non-native plant has been found in this study area, so that indicates a very healthy ecosystem, and it's incredibly important to preserve what little of these pristine habitats that we have left in British Columbia. And this was an exciting find, the Methuselah's beard lichen, Usnea longissima. It had only been found in a few small fragments inland before, but in one local area in the larger of the two valleys, it was found in abundance, growing in a few colonies. And again, this is an indicator of a very wet and biodiverse ecosystem. And then there's a stunning array of plant life that we have also come across. And there has been quite an extensive inventory documented so far, but definitely not an exhaustive one. In addition to rare and at-risk species that have been found in these two valleys so far, we've also come across more common rainforest species growing in unusual abundance and size. So this is Oploplanax, commonly referred to as Devil's Club, and I've never seen it at this stature before. And the same goes for the skunk cabbage. So this is truly a BC jungle and an incredibly rich ecosystem. Then we undertook a wildlife habitat assessment in the larger of the two valleys with our bear biologist and wildlife biologist Wayne McCrory. And again, this was just an initial survey, so it took place over 1 day in about a kilometer and a half stretch of the main largest valley along a very prominent wildlife trail. But we have documented any wildlife sign that we've come across over the last 2 years in both of the valleys. And we have come across abundant ungulate activity, lots of bear activity, as well as signs of native amphibians around the wetlands. And we have found Pacific chorus frog and western toad near one of the larger wetlands. And this signifies that it could be an important breeding habitat, especially since the wetland is adjacent to forested habitat. But surveys of the wetlands have not yet been completed, so there's lots more to see. So we assessed bear habitat suitability along this transect in various habitat types, including young and old forest and avalanche tracks. And we also documented various bear and ungulate food items and assessed the large hollow cedar trees for potential black bear dens, and did find signs of denning activity. And we also came across an interesting moose kill site where the carcass had been dragged, and that indicated a potential grizzly feeding site. And we have found smaller excavated cedar dens as well, so this is likely a mustelid denning site, and there's still so much more to see here. And here are directors Wayne and Craig with a giant cedar black bear den. And then we've been monitoring trail cameras in the largest of the two valleys as well. And we have had some technical difficulties, but we've placed these along high-use wildlife trails, and we've been able to at least confirm some of our wildlife findings. And this footage has been very entertaining, to say the least. And since then, we found a few bear rub trees that we're hoping to get some interesting footage from as well. Then further back in the largest valley, there are these incredibly deeply rutted wildlife trails. And we can only imagine the stories that could be told here, but we speculate that they may have actually been used by large herds of mountain caribou at one time. So when we undertook the first wildlife habitat assessment, we were completely distracted by the diversity of macrofungi that were popping up all around us. And as soon as we got home, we had to call our mycologist friend Tyson Ellers to undertake the first mycological assessment of this valley. And again, this was just an initial survey. In one day, in under 5 hours, Tyson documented 112 taxa of macrofungi. But he was completely overwhelmed. There was just way greater diversity than he could have even possibly scratched the surface of. So there's so much more work that needs to be done here to uncover the secrets of the biodiversity that exists here. But in those 5 hours, Tyson did document 10 young forest species, 6 species that were completely unique to the wetland riparian area that was surveyed, 17 mixed stand species, and 79 old-growth species. So the focus was on the old growth. It's definitely the most biodiverse area, and it is well known that the old growth forest far exceeds the mycological diversity of the other surrounding ecosystem types. And we're only beginning to understand the importance of this incredible diversity in these old growth forests. There is research coming out to suggest that the majority of the carbon stored in old growth forests is actually stored in the fungal networks underground. So these smaller species are often overlooked, but we're only beginning to understand what their true importance could be. And then we did come across this very rare species, Hypocreoleucopus, which is a very rare fungal species that is a relative of the cordyceps fungus. And there had been no previous records in the Kootenay-Columbia region. So again, we're just starting to scratch the surface here. We have not yet undertaken an entomological survey, but just from the diversity of the other species that we found, we can imagine that this would yield promising results as well. Okay, so why the ancient inland rainforest ecosystem? This ecosystem is not only rare in British Columbia, but it is also very rare globally. And it's also globally significant for a number of reasons. So as we have seen, they're very biodiverse, and all throughout the forest we see carpets of species on top of carpets of other species. They're also very understudied. In British Columbia in general, only 3,800 species have been assessed out of an estimated 50,000 species, not including single-celled organisms. And we're also losing this taxonomic expertise. There's very little funding available for this type of taxonomic work. But in a time of biodiversity loss, this could be some of the most important work that we could be doing. And in the Inland Temperate Rainforest region, there are at least 40 known species at risk. But again, we don't know what we could be losing without even first discovering that it exists. So it's crucially important to preserve these last intact and resilient ecosystems. And this Rainbow Jordan wilderness that we're showing you today is one of such few remaining similar ecosystem types that it could provide significant refuge for some of the species that depend on this ancient inland temperate rainforest ecosystem. These are some of our highest biomass forests, and so they are also some of the greatest carbon sequestering forests in the world. Even better than tropical forests, but they're not given the credit that they deserve in terms of their importance. They're also some of our most resilient forests, so we can see that they are proven resilient by their age. They have obviously withstood hundreds, if not many thousands of years of climatic flux, of pests and disease, and all sorts of changes, and they have stood resilient all of these years. And they are our best bet for forests that are going to stand tall and strong amid the changes that we're projecting to see with climate change, and continue to stay standing and provide refuge for the incredible biodiversity that provides us with the ecosystem services that we need to survive. Some research suggests that the wettest of these forests are the least likely to burn. So we're rapidly losing the forests that are more susceptible to burning. Younger forests, plantation forests. We're seeing wildfires starting in cut blocks where the landscape is incredibly dry from the loss of these precipitous ecosystems. And there is research now to suggest that precipitous ecosystems act as a firebreak on the landscape and can continue to provide a biodiversity refuge amid these incredible landscape changes. So keeping them intact is incredibly important as we continue to see plantation forests burn and fail due to monocropping and their susceptibility to pests and disease on a large scale. And again, they provide invaluable ecosystem services, massive volumes of clean water, clean air. And then we have all sorts of medicinal and botanical products. And again, we don't know what true value to humankind may be hiding in these forests, and we'll never get it back once it's gone. And of course, there is incredible spiritual value that comes from keeping these forests intact. And there's a complete sense of wellness and peace that comes to anyone who visits these incredible forests. And for any of our friends and supporters that we've taken into this wilderness, I think they would all agree that the benefits of keeping these ecosystems intact extend far beyond their ecological value. Unfortunately, only about 17% of the inland temperate rainforest region is currently protected. And this is compared to 33% of our coastal temperate rainforest in BC. And much of the protected area in the inland temperate rainforest region is currently in higher elevation areas and lower biodiversity forests. So since undertaking these initial ecological inventories and all of the other excursions that we've taken into these two valleys over the last 2 years, we have mapped out these two valleys as a new provincial park proposal to the BC government, and have since presented this proposal, as well as our two other inland temperate rainforest park proposals, to the BC government as a portfolio of 3 major remaining biodiversity hotspots of the inland temperate rainforest region. And here you can see that we've also included a major part of the Jordan River. And what we're focused on protecting here is the very last of the ancient intact inland temperate rainforest. So you can see vast tracts of old-growth interior cedar hemlock forest, as well as Engelmann spruce subalpine fir forest throughout the proposal. So here's a summary of the old-growth forest captured within the park proposal boundaries, and again, the protection of old growth is the focus here. So most of the forest is in age class 9, which includes anything 250 years old or older, also including the ancient forest that can be 1,500 years or older. And that's one of the issues with our current age class system, is that trees that are 250 years old are treated the same as trees that are 2,000 years old. And I just want to close by saying that we are rapidly running out of opportunities to protect any of this heritage to pass on to the next generation. And we absolutely need support of all British Columbians to stand up and make this a priority, to speak up. We're running out of time and experiencing extreme abuse of our landscape. And we do need everybody to stand up and speak up for the very last of our old growth forests. So I hope everyone will stand with me in being a voice for the very last of these ancient ecosystems in British Columbia. Please visit our website, visit our action page, vws.org/action, and write into government. This is how Valhalla Wilderness Society has had so much success over the years, is through letter writing campaigns. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to everyone who helped bring this new park proposal to fruition.